And with that, let's get started. Okay, so we're going to talk about influencing DevOps without authority, and really how everybody, even people who are individual contributors, can help by means other than yelling at the cloud or at DevOps.
And to do this talk, we're going to take you on a mythical journey with our hero. Please meet Alex. This is Alex. Baruch, this is Alex.
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
yeah.
this is Alex. Yes.
Thank you, Baruch.
Yeah,
And
technology is
Alex,
hard.
I know presenting together is never easy. And Alex is a system administrator at a very high tech company called Western Textile. You know, they build very high tech products known as yarn and fabrics. And Alex's job feels like a lot of jobs for traditional system administrators. It feels like that. He has a problem at his job. Every company is a software company today, and so was Western Textile, and it needed to be enabled by software, except that software was delivered to Alex like that. Now, Alex understands that things can be different.
Yeah, and Alex goes online and reads a bunch of stuff. And one of the things that he reads about is this new thing called DevOps. It's only been 10 years out there. So now it becomes popular. And it looks like DevOps does what he needs. It's breaking silos in software engineering workplace. And it looks like that's exactly what Alex wants to achieve. There is additional perk, and our sponsor, Linux Recruiters, can definitely vouch for that. You can see how being a DevOps engineer paying at least 50% more than being a system administrator. And obviously that's a good thing as well.
Well, so what does Alex to do? Alex goes on a job board and finds a new role that says, "Hey, a DevOps engineer," and joins another very high tech software company known as Strong Fabric Company. Still in the similar space, still not very high tech in its core business, but now he is a DevOps engineer. What does Alex do at the new role?
Alex does DevOps engineering stuff like installing Jenkins on a desktop computer or implementing DevOps in their DevOps environment. You know, DevOps engineer does DevOps engineering.
As you can imagine, that other than the salary and the title, not much has changed in that environment for Alex. Because still operating in isolation and in its own department and in the bubble, still exposes him to the exact same set of problems that he was exposed to before.
And then Alex started thinking that the problem is really not the title, the problem is the collaboration. And now, while he is a DevOps engineer, he starts to think about collaboration between dev and DevOps. And then he tokens a new term, DevDevOps. DevDevOps is about collaboration between dev and DevOps. And he has some dreams of making it a reality and earn a lot of money out of it. But of course, jokes aside, instead he does something else.
Of course, he goes to the single source of information in the universe that we should all be going to, the Wikipedia, and reads the definition of what DevOps is supposed to be. And then he goes and reads some of the good books. And this is just the first three. Throughout this talk, Baruch and I think we're recommending about half a dozen, if not a dozen, of different books. But he goes and reads the fundamental. And if you haven't read any of them, we do strongly encourage you to fill those gaps. Of course, there's the seminal book on the topic, The Phoenix Project. The follow-up to that book, the DevOps Handbook. And the most latest kind of iteration in the space, the book called Accelerate by Nicole Ferguson, Jazz, and Jean, that continues and will continue to deepen the theoretical knowledge of what DevOps is all about for you. And that's what Alex has done. And what Alex sees from that is DevOps really, as I'm sure by now, hopefully all of you know, is still deep specialization in all of those key disciplines that traditionally have contributed to delivering a successful software project, and some new disciplines that are now emerging and we're slowly tacking into the name, like security. And you probably heard the term DevSecOps tossed around, but it's also about common goals and common culture and making those deep disciplines collaborate with each other without simply mashing everything into one big pile and hoping that something good will come out of it.
And another resource on top of the books that Leonid mentioned, including the Accelerate book, is the State of DevOps report that emerged as a result of the methodology laid out in the Accelerate book. And there are a lot of very important things in the State of DevOps report. And while Alex goes through it, they realize that their organization is actually on the low spectrum of the possible implementations of DevOps, and they see those signs as very infrequent deployment, a large, very long time to lead time to changes, and a very long time to restore service, and very high failure rate. And they realize that yes, things can be different. And just for a comparison of how things are moving in the right direction, well, you can see there in the State of DevOps report how between only in 1 year, between 2018 and 2019, the number of the elite performers who actually get DevOps and do DevOps right tripled from 7% to 20%. And Alex starts to think, why that happens, why people strive to implement DevOps.
And as you can imagine, DevOps as a movement did not emerge for the sake of movement emerging, right? It emerged because we had a constituency that we as a business all had to satisfy, and this constituency, the users. And in this day and age, what do those users want? Well, they want new capabilities, new features. We live in a very fast evolving world where what worked yesterday didn't work today. So when do they want those features? Well, naturally, they want them yesterday or now, right? And that's combined with new things that are emerging that are moving very quickly, because we as an industry have neglected security for many, many years. And security now becomes a substantial risk to any business, whether it's a reputational risk, financial risk. You have to be able to move quickly and kind of, we release our software once a year or once a quarter. It doesn't hunt anymore. And if you think about that, the iteration cycle that is needed, whether it's to cover the security issue or to create a new feature, it's identify, fix or develop, and then deploy quickly and iterate and experiment. So if you see this diagram, it's very natural that you will see this split between the elite and medium performance open up. The reason for this is very simple and was postulated by Darwin himself. It's the evolutionary pressure that every business has to continue to improve in a competitive environment. And you start seeing the elite emerging, and everybody else who is not adopting the new ways is starting to go and kind of being left behind.
And Alex realized all that by reading all the books that we started to suggest. And then Alex also managed to get themselves into a couple of very important meetings on the top floors of their executive building. And in those meetings, this is what the top management discusses. They want to release faster. And the ideas they hear are a lot of the ideas that we hear around our industry, stuff like, let's hire more DevOps engineers. We do need DevOps, so let's do DevOps engineers. Or absurdities like, okay, the QA slows us down, let's just go ahead and get rid of all the QA. But if they try to suggest really implementing DevOps, the culture switch, the methodology change, and all this kind of stuff, well, you know how this meme ends. It doesn't go very, very well with the management that Alex naively tried to influence, but just putting the ideas out there.
And one of the more common reasons for that happening that way is the fact that people that see the problem want to solve the problem, and people that are the decision makers up there in the decision in the org chart, and people that want to solve the problem somewhere down there in the org chart are not traveling in the same circles. And obviously people like Alex don't wield any authority to make changes at the company. So what is Alex to do?
And Alex finds the way, and this is exactly the way that we want to present to you today. And let's start with introductions. Thank you for our host, I was introduced properly. My name is Baruch Sadogursky, and I'm the Chief Sticker Officer, but also Head of DevOps Advocacy with JFrog. At JBaruch is my Twitter handle. In JFrog, we do tools that help you implement the DevOps methodologies and culture and to release faster in order to satisfy your users and to make sure your security is up to speed. So check us out at jfrog.com. Follow me on Twitter at JBaruch. And I have the pleasure, the tremendous pleasure, to introduce Leonid Golnik. And he is the secret speaker that I brought to you today. Leonid has decades of experience in leading software engineering teams. And he is one of the few people that made this transition to DevOps number of times in his career. So he obviously has a lot of experience and a lot of hands-on knowledge. So Leonid, thank you very much for taking the time and joining us today. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you as my co-speaker.
Happy to be here. And as Baruch said, I've been fortunate enough to be around the SaaS industry before the term has been coined. I've done this for 23 years. I most recently ran engineering for a company called SignalFX that was acquired by Splunk, that was in the infrastructure monitoring space, where we were monitoring some of the largest deployments in the world for companies like Stripe, Square, Yelp, Atlassian, and have had my own teams have helped teams transition. And you can find me on Twitter as well. I'm at Eli Golnik, and you'll see my Twitter handle somewhere at the footer of most slides.
Yeah, so but that's another thing. If you go to jfrog.com/show notes, you will be able to see the slides over there, the video as the organizers make it available, all the links for all the books and the report and what's not. Everything we talk about is there, but also a place to comment, to rate, and this amazing raffle that JFrog prepared for you. It's a last generation GoPro and 10 amazing JFrog t-shirts that are there for you to grab. Now, the footer of every slide has the link to jfrog.com/show notes, but also the Twitter handle of Leonid, my Twitter handle, and the hashtag of today's meeting.
Now, as you made the note from a slight accent Baruch and I have, we have not grown up in the U.S. We grew up in a country where the motto was learn, learn, and learn again, as prescribed to us by the father of USSR, Vladimir Lenin. And we're going to be learning here again, and we're going to give you some more books recommendations before we get into the meat of the talk that we think you should at least check out and consider.
Yeah, so consider those books as your theoretical minimum before you go and try to convince something that DevOps is important. And those are some of the books that Leonid already mentioned, like the Phoenix Project and the Accelerate book and the DevOps Handbook, but also others. Site Reliability Engineering, it's kind of more of the engineering part of DevOps. The Unicorn Project with an alternative reality view on the Phoenix Project world. And another book which is very important called War, Peace, and IT by Mark Schwartz. And this book is for leadership, for them to read and understand why DevOps is important. And even for you, when you try to speak with leadership, will be very, very useful to read. And the Liquid Software book, which I have the honor to co-author with two of co-founders of JFrog, that's about continuous updates and how to speed up this from code to the user's flow.
All right. Some more resources for you in terms of the sources we like to. There's several podcasts that we like on the theme. So number one, DevOpsish. Great podcast that is available. Baruch is hosting a podcast called DevOps Speakeasy. There's a ton of material from DevOps days on YouTube, and you may find great materials on a specific topic that you're interested about. And one of my personal favorite is a not very well-known free product from a company called ThoughtWorks, one of the largest technical consultancies in the world, something called the Technology Radar. And ThoughtWorks puts very deliberate thought into recommending and evaluating different technologies, methodologies, techniques, platform, et cetera, et cetera. The Radar is available online, and it's a great thing that I personally check out before any of my teams try to adopt any tool. Always found it a great source of useful information.
Another thing on the DevOps radar, on the technology radar, CNCF did something similar, learning from or borrowing the model of technology radar from ThoughtWorks, and they asking their end users. In the end of the day, the model is very simple, but around cloud native technologies, we probably need to add it to the slide to the next time we do this talk.
Awesome. So now that you're equipped with theory, I'm sure you're quite ready to go into your own company and say, you know what, it's time for us to change. DevOps is the thing. You feel like that, right?
Oh yeah, we're ready to go, and then we open the door of the manager, and what do we hear? Yeah, don't like that. Don't like that can come from tons of different reasons, and we will name a few why people kind of say no to you. First of all, people just won't listen. They're busy, they have their own work to do, and they really are not into it. The second one is they will get distracted. So yes, it sounds like a good idea. Let me think about it. Never thought about it as well at all.
I'm sure you all have colleagues that can be all talk but no action. You need to know how to identify those and be wary of them, because I had numerous conversations at different companies where people said, yeah, no, it's a great idea, and nothing happened. So that could be a reason. The next thing is one of my favorite concepts from chemistry. Activation energy for any reaction, it can be hard, right? If you're trying to take a flywheel and try to get it spinning from 0 to the full speed, depending on the size of the flywheel, you have to put a lot of initial energy to get this thing going. So activation energy for an organizational transformation can be very, very hard. So you will be pretty frustrated with all of those and some of you may have attempted that if you've already run into those things.
So what we try to say here, there are a lot of valid reasons for you to give up, because you try it and you put all the activation energy in and no one listens, and what you want to do is just give in. Yep, Winston Churchill tells us not to do that.
Well, it's important not to give in and give up. It's also important not to try to boil the ocean. And we'll talk about how to get your transformation started. And to guide us through this, we're actually going to use a model from another book that we like and recommend, and it's called Influence Without Authority. It's applicable to a lot of other topics in your life and subjects in your life, but it has a 6-step model that we're going to run you through. It's called Cohen-Bradford model of influence without authority. It has, and we'll run methodically through all of those steps and help you understand how to leverage the model in the context of a DevOps transformation. And let us start with the first step. And the first step in the model says that you have to assume that everybody in the organization can be a potential ally.
What does it mean? First of all, it's a good habit for life. Generally thinking positively about people, giving them the credit, giving them the opportunity to prove that they are well intent, and not striking people out from being your potential ally just because you think they won't play ball. That's kind of thinking limits you in what you can achieve. So instead, let's assume that everybody wants to implement DevOps with you. It's a great thought. Some of them might be proven right, some of them wrong. It doesn't matter. We should start with all our opportunities open.
So let's talk about where to find the right types of allies for your transformation. One of the areas that I personally like to look for is what I call the forward-looking teams. In every organization, there's always a team that is either more maybe hipsterish, more advanced. They may be working on something that is not as attached to the core of the business, and therefore they have the flexibility to use some of more modern techniques or technologies. Partnering up with a forward-looking team drastically reduces that activation energy and allows you to get your transformation on the way. Similarly to that, in any organization, there are always highly visible teams, maybe because they're working on a very important organizational project, and maybe, or maybe they're just visible by the nature of what they do. partnering around with the team like that, if they have the right mentality and the right capability, could also help you infect the rest of the organizations with this transformation. Now, as important it is to look for forward-looking teams or highly visible teams, it's also important to make sure that you don't deal with teams that simply cruise along and attach themselves to anything else that is happening to organization, because they're not likely to be a good ally for you. The most productive way that I personally found looking for those types of organization is talking to people and having those interactive conversation. It is much harder in this day and age with the pandemic, because the traditional water cooler talk is not an option that we have. But there are other ways of trying to understand what folks are up to, what kind of work they're doing, how successful they are, how flexible they are, and how good of a partner they can be for you. So that's the first type of the model, finding a potential ally to get your transformation rolling. The next step is clarifying your own goals and priorities so you can be crisp about them for yourself, and be transparent about them with your partners.
And the first goal is, we kind of mentioned already when we spoke about Alex. Alex wants DevOps to help the organization, and especially and namely the ops folks, as they were, to be more productive. They are doing it to make it work better than it worked before, and this is a great reason.
All right. One of those is doing the right thing, because we all are in business and evolutionary pressure is a thing, right? We all want to work at the company that survives. We also want to be in the environment that is pleasant to work at. We all work, we spend a lot of time at work, and we want to make sure that we work in a modern environment that doesn't look like it's about to fall apart. And then lastly, quite frankly, given where the industry is going, enhancing your own ability to be influential in your next role and enhancing your resume is not a small consideration for taking on a project like this. All of us are now live in a day and age where the current company we work for is unlikely to be the last one we have joined. So getting clarity on what drives your own priorities is important, because you may have to communicate that, and you have to be genuine about that. Which brings us to the next stage of the model, which is diagnosing the world of the other person after you finish diagnosing your own world.
And here we can start when we just left. Probably for the people that you are going to influence, their career is important as well. And as Leonid mentioned, there is nothing wrong with that. There is absolutely valid point. One of your influential points can be, hey, it will advance you in your career, and there is nothing wrong with that. But obviously that's not the only reason, and we should look at the modern research about people motivation to understand what really motivates the other people. And one of the books that we both very like very much is Drive by Daniel Pink. And in this book, if you didn't read it, you definitely should. Daniel highlights 3 factors lead to better performance and personal satisfaction. None of them is money. Is the autonomy, mastery, and purpose. We're going to use those factors to diagnose the world of other person later in this model. But for now, you need to remember people are driven by things which are completely different from the naive understanding of the carrot and the stick that we might think about. And there are tons of other books about human psychology and behavioral psychology that can be really, really helpful when you work with people. For example, Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely, or SWI by the Brafmans, or many others. Those are just our favorites. But what you need to remember in the end of the day, what people want is not necessarily money.
A lot of the stakeholders you're going to have to influence probably want some of the things you want yourself, but also they want some legacy behind them. And it's especially important when it comes to influencing decision makers. So that's another part of kind of understanding the human psychology that it's going to be important. For you to use to diagnose the world of your partners to make sure you can create that successful partnership. Speaking of diagnosing the world of others, there are plenty of other considerations that are very concrete.
So we will give you a couple of examples of those. So for example, stuff like metrics, how people are measured. If helping you, will they help their to drive their metrics to the right place?
Understanding their work incentives and understanding what their leadership is expect of them and how their leaders will react to them trying to engage this project is also incredibly important if you want to understand what motivates a person and how to partner with them.
Another example, will it be interesting for them? Will they be really engaged and having fun doing what you want them to do?
Is it aligned with their career aspiration and interests? Is another consideration to make sure you don't neglect to understand.
How their colleagues will react. Will their colleagues feel threatened by the move that they are doing after your influence? If they're afraid that they will be scolded by the colleagues, they won't help you.
Do they have the physical and the mental bandwidth to partner up with you successfully, or are they already running a 26-hour day trying to barely keep up with their day job?
Are they even of the helping type? Maybe they just don't like doing things for other people.
And then sometimes we all have things that happen outside of work. Are they distracted and occupied by something outside of work that may preclude them from spending the energy, both mental and physical, that is required for that successful transformation? All of those kind of non-functional considerations, they're not about tools, they're not about what's in place, they're not about what they're working on. It's about things that are not always on the surface, and you need to learn how to extract and diagnose them if you want to find the best partner.
Going back to the first one that we mentioned, metrics, how other people are measured is extremely important, because when you understand how they are measured, you can actually use that to influence them. And in DevOps world, the metrics are well defined thanks to the Accelerate book and the great work that Dr. Nicole Forrest Green and her peer has done. And those metrics are very clear. You can see them defined very, very simply in the Accelerate book. And those are the metrics that will help drive your organization from being a low performance in DevOps to be an elite. And just to remind you, this is what builds a legacy for people who helped doing that, including you and the people that you try to influence.
So the question you should be asking is, great, you just told us about all of those things. Where do I find some of the information short of asking the individual humans? Well, we have some suggestions for you. Different companies have different ways of aligning on the goals. OKRs is a good example. A lot of companies are adopting that as a metric, objectives and key results. Well, maybe you have a place in the company where those are recorded, so you can go take a look at them. You can look at individual teams' backlogs in your iteration management system or in your backlog management system, Jira, Rally, whatever the company is using, to see what the teams are working on. A lot of times there are all hands presentations or team presentations that talk about the projects, the challenges, et cetera, et cetera. Also could be a very useful source of information. And of course, as we talked about it, the water cooler talk is still a very viable source of that type of information.
And now let's try and do something practical. Let's try and diagnose the world of other person by applying what we just told you to a certain stereotypes of some of the professionals in the organization. Obviously, it's stereotyping and all people are different. They're motivated by other things. But if we try and group them into groups and try to determine what drives them, we can put them in one of those pigeonholes, if you like, by what that motivates them on a scale of autonomy, mastery, and purpose, what they're afraid of when they're facing DevOps transformation, and how we can use that to influence them.
So let's use a couple of examples, and maybe if in the interest of time, we're gonna run through them quickly. But let's start with a system administrator, right? Or developers, actually, first. Let's start with developers. What do they look for when it comes to the autonomy? Well, software engineers want to be able to push software and deliver value to their customers. So they want to be able to deploy without anybody else interfering in the deployment. That's an example of furthering somebody's autonomy by provided automated deployment pipelines. What are they worried about? Well, they're worried about that those system administrators and those DevOps peoples and those SREs are going to put them on call without understanding that, you know, in a well-run system, on call is not that scary. And that's an example of a fear that may need to be overcome by when you bring those organizations together under the DevOps culture.
Let's take a look at another persona in our organization. Let's talk about ops. And this is Alex, for our example. What is the mastery of ops in our day and age? Well, this is all the site reliability, service reliability, cloud native engineering, and all this stuff. Infrastructure as code, Kubernetes, service meshes, and all this stuff. Implementing DevOps gives them great opportunity to do exactly that. What they are afraid of? Well, obviously, they're afraid of being blamed for outages. Now they give the production access to the developers. The developers is going to ruin everything. Who is going to pay for that? Us, the ops people. Obviously, our job will be convincing them that this is not the case.
All right. What are the fears? Sorry, let's talk about testers, and maybe that's the last one we'll cover, and we'll show you a couple other examples briefly. So, the testers need to be autonomous. They ideally would like to be able to do destructive testing. They like to be able to spin up environments that they need to do their job without having to depend on another team or without having to go beg or borrow a test environment. That's an example of an autonomy there. Obviously, what's their purpose? Well, quality. Only production quality matters, and anything that motivates them and helps them to achieve better quality, they would want to partner up on.
And you can do this exercise with other personas in your organization. Obviously, you need to think about the security people, what motivates them, what are their fears, about product people, the same, what they're afraid of or what they want to achieve, and see how DevOps can help each and every one of them to achieve their goals and how you can mitigate the fears that they have.
All right. So so what does it all mean to you, right? It sounds like in order to be successful, I have to understand a lot about all of those things so I can relate to all of the other parties I need to go partner up. And it sounds like, Baruch, we're almost advocating that, you know, you have to be almost a unicorn to be successful in pulling off the transformation bottoms up.
This is scary, but the good news are that unicorns do not exist, so as people who understand everything about everything. But the good news are you really don't have to. You don't have to understand everything about everything. What you need to strive to be is be a T-shaped person. And there are a lot of talk about T-shaped people now. And this is almost what I think about when I hear the term T-shaped people. But what actually people mean by that is that you still have your deep specialization, as Leonid mentioned before, and you are still an ops person or a developer or a QA person, but you do your best to understand the world of other people. What we just mentioned, you make it your job to know what other people think about, and then you can actually influence them by using their knowledge.
And the most interesting thing is there's another alternative to being deep. The alternative is being broad.
Yep. And this is a great book, another one of the books that we recommend you by David Epstein. It's called Range. And this is about how generalists, the people that know a lot of everything, but maybe not everything there is to know, actually perform much better than very, very deep specialists.
And interestingly enough, there's a late breaking news on that topic. TED, the YouTube channel for TED Talks, just released a talk by the author of this book yesterday. And if somebody from the team that is facilitating the webinar has a minute to go chase it down and put it in the chat, it's a kind of brief summary of the book that may encourage you to read it. I watched the talk yesterday. It's a great kind of highlights of the book. So that's a bit about this stage of the model, diagnosing the world of other person. Now, let's talk about the next step, which is identifying currencies, theirs and yours, that you can use in order to build that partnership.
And there are a lot of types of currencies, and we don't refer to money. We refer to something that we can trade while we have this negotiation about trying to make other people do what you need. And one of them can be, for example, inspiration related. This is a great thing to do. I want to do it. Or task related. I need to do it anyway because it will advance my own agenda. Or position related. This will help me grow in the organization. Relationship advantage. I want to do it as a favor to you. Or person related. I want to help this person because they are great.
All right. So we believe that, you know, the best relationships are built like symbiotic relationships. And I think that's what we recommend you think about as you build your partnerships. And we have several examples, or one very common example where some of those partnerships can start surreptitiously.
And the example that Leonid refers to is a hackathon, organizing a hackathon inside your organization. How it is even a currency for everyone? Well, surprise, it's actually almost every type of currency that we mentioned. It's inspiration because you want to have some fun. It's task related because the outcomes of the hackathon can be something that you really need for your work. It's position related because it can help you advance, and it's relationship related. You can actually build a relationship with other people by doing the hackathon, and it's person related because you can now have a favor that you do for something else by creating a software that they need, and this can be then called as a favor. We're going to talk about that a little bit later.
So the next step in the model is dealing with relationships. And it's a very, very deep topic that probably warrants an entire talk by itself. And it's a fairly general purpose topic. So we're not going to go deep on that, but we're going to give you some of our recommendations on the subject here.
Yeah, and you know, the relationship is that. The relationship is that you say something, and if it's very smart, next thing you know, you are thrown out of the window because you're no one wants to listen to you. This is all about the relationship. The only way to build those relationships is actually working with people. And working with people, as I already mentioned, is hard because, Leonids, what's the say about the feedback loop?
Humans are non-deterministic variable feedback time machines, unlike computers that are deterministic fixed feedback time machines.
So that's exactly the opposite of what we like. And this is exactly the problem. The only way to deal with people is actually learning about how they operate. And again, bunch of books, very highly recommended in order to overcome that. And this is that. We cannot give you any practical advice because humans are hard.
So that brings us to the last step of model, the influence through give and take. And give and take, also known as quid pro quo, has been in the news lately in not in the very positive connotations, as you can imagine. But humans, as species for millennia, have been building relationships and arrangements based on exchange of value. And there are all kinds of exchange that don't have the negative connotations that can be used to build your transformation and get it started. There are things like interest alignment, where as we talked about, when you identified the right team, maybe some of their motivational OKRs, what they're trying to achieve, are very aligned with this transformation. And that's a great subject for partnership.
Another one is just barter. That's like, I have the thing you want, you have the thing I want, and this is how it's done.
The other thing is basically doing people favors. Every once in a while, we all have access to organizational resources that we don't need, and it's the right thing to invest those resources to help the other team. And it works both ways. Creating a favors and calling in a favors is a very good foundation to creating those types of relationships that start transformations.
And this is, but just to remind you, hackathon I was mentioned as a part of building a favor that you can later trade. And you know what? This is the end of the model. We went through the all six steps, and now you know the theory. And now, Leonid, can we assume that people can go and influence for anything, including DevOps in their organization, just after listening to this talk?
Absolutely. I think they're fully equipped to go and transform any organization of any size to be the modern DevOps shop. Maybe not. Maybe not.
Well, not really. And we will take the last 1 minute in order to go and talk a little bit about examples of objections. So and examples of barriers.
Yeah, there are all kinds of barriers you're going to have to overcome. And we talked about some of them here. This power differential, right? You have no authority. You have to go through influence. You will deal with lack of alignment on goals and priorities. So either you partner up with the team that has similar priorities, or you have to figure out how to influence priorities. You will run into teams that are measured by measures that are incompatible with the transformation. So again, either finding teams that are to get the transformation going or influence the measures becomes important. And last one is, fundamental human inter-organizational team rivalries can be external barriers for getting your transformation going.
And there are also internal barriers, and those the barriers are in your head. For example, lack of experience. You heard about the model, go practice because you do the real thing in your organization. Blinding attitude. Remember when we spoke about assuming everybody are allies? If I rule anyone out, well, they won't play ball anyway. I'm limiting my potential for influencing. Fear of failing. I won't even start with that because I will probably fail. And fear of reaction. Well, what do I do if this goes wrong? Can I go back to my work and pretend that nothing happens? If that's your kind of backup plan, you probably won't be at your best. It's better to have alternative to what's going on if you fail than not to have one. And the last part of this talk is, let's just go through like 4 the most common objectives and just say, what can be your reply to that?
Well, let's start with the basics. Developers reacting to this whole DevOps thing in a scary way. Like I go home and, I can forget about work. Now you want me to be on call? That's not my job.
Yeah, so we have a talk about that. It's called DevOps for Developers, or maybe Against Them, in which I go into detail why developers want to play ball with all this DevOps thing and not opposed to it.
What's wrong with what we're doing right now, Baruch? Like we gotten here as a company, clearly something's working.
Absolutely, a lot of things working, but the environment changes. And obviously you remember Equifax and what happened because they just kept doing of what they did before and didn't move forward. The environment changing, so you cannot stay in place.
All right. You convinced me that this is incredibly important, but we just don't have time. We're barely keeping up with all the stuff that we're trying to do.
Well, that's legit, but DevOps is those initiatives which worth investing into to gain more time after the transformation is in place.
All right. You talked about silos. I thought silos were good. They promote specialization. This way people know what they're doing and they're not going to screw it up. Like, what is this whole thing about, like, bringing people together and under this common set of goals and culture and, like, are they all going to be generalist?
Yeah, the thing is not that we object to specialization. Is that the problem is that producing software is almost like a floor of a factory, and there is a process in which can be bottlenecks. And if we sit inside our silos and we don't optimize at the bottlenecks, we don't optimize at all. And this is Eliyahu Goldratt and his amazing book, yet another book, The Goal, which is also available like a graphic novel if you prefer this type of consumption of material. And this is what they talk about: how to optimize. In order to optimize the bottleneck, you should get out of your silos.
Okay, but we're a regulated business. Name your regulation: PCI, DSS, HIPAA, CCPA, GDPR, ISO 9001. We can't release faster. We have compliance and checks and balances in place.
Absolutely. And my answer to that will go ahead and automate. Certify your pipeline, certify your robots instead of certifying the end product. And this is where you can release faster. And it's true not only for your regulation, it's only true for QA. QA is a bottleneck, implement QA automation. Security is a bottleneck, implement security as automation. Once you regularly automate, you can get rid of those bottlenecks and manage to release faster.
All right. I think with that, we're going to remind you of your possible success if you can transform an organization and perhaps become a leader after that transformation, not just in that organization, but your future career endeavors. We're going to sum this up by reminding you about the 6-step influence without authority model and encourage you to learn about objection handling. And I'm Leonid Igolnik. You can find me at Igolnik on Twitter.
I'm Jay Baruch on Twitter, and this is Dev Exchange New York City, the inaugural meetup. Congrats to all the organizers. And if you go to jeffrey.com's show notes, you'll find there obviously all the information and the raffle for the amazing GoPro Hero 8. With that, thank you very much.